Hi, I'm Jordan Tigani, co-founder and CEO of MotherDuck. This is my pitch and raise for our first 100 million. So we've raised $100 million so far in 3 rounds in just about a year from the inception of the company. The first round was before I even knew that I wanted to start a company. I had a friend who I had told I was kind of thinking about working on something kind of as a side project, and he made an introduction. I was asking for an introduction to somebody, but he said, while you're at it, why don't you talk to my friend Tom, who invested in my company. His company was Looker. They had a really nice exit. And he's like, Tom invested early in Looker and he was with us through the end. He was awesome. And so I'm like, oh yeah, sure, sounds good. And he's like, Tom will give you some feedback on the idea, let you know whether it has legs, maybe kind of give you some, help you polish it up, etc. The next day I talked to Tom Tungas at Redpoint, and I get about 15 minutes in and he's like, yeah, this is a good idea. I want to fund it. Come to my partner meeting next week. And I hadn't written down anything at that point. I hadn't started writing any code. I hadn't really done anything other than had a vague idea. And so I was kind of shocked at the interest. And I kind of like, oh, that sounds fun. And then the next day I was talking to two other VCs, Martin Casado and Alad Gil, about something totally different. They were kind of working on something else. And I said, hey, look, I'm probably not the right person to help you with this thing, but I had this idea, kicking around in the back of my head, any chance you're interested in it, thinking that I was going to be wasting their time. Of course, they wouldn't want to talk to me about this silly idea. And, I get to 15 minutes in and Martine said, this is a good idea. I want to fund it. You just had the partner meeting. And how much do you want? And I had no idea at the time. I had no idea it was reasonable. I had no idea how much it would cost. And I blurted out, $5 million. And he's like, yeah, sure, sounds good. And I was like a little bit of a deer in the headlights moment. And the next day I had 5 offers from really good VCs and still hadn't really decided that I wanted to start a company. It was just sort of this sort of momentum thing that was going. The next day I'd had a vacation planned as my first vacation since pre-COVID to Portugal. And so kind of that gave me a bit of time to sort of decompress, think about what I wanted to actually do. I did actually want to start a company. And so we ended up raising 12 and a half on a 50 post for our seed. But there was clearly a lot of interest left in the company and people who hadn't gotten into that round. A couple of months later, I'd been talking, a bunch of VCs had been introducing themselves and said, hey, we'll start building a relationship for your next round. I know you're not raising now. And so I talked to a couple of them, and I would get these people who would kind of drop, casually into the end, oh, and by the way, this sounds really good. And by the way, if you were interested in taking another $30 million, we'd be happy to work with you. They weren't just meeting me on video calls. They were flying from New York. So it seemed like, hey, there's still some interest here. We had one offer come in at a 200 million post. This is for a company that has only been coding for 4 months, which was, quite a high offer, but it was sort of a line in the sand that says, hey, see if there's any interest here. This was kind of the end of 2022. Headiness of 2021 had already started to fade, but you could still kind of do some silly things like that. There was an interesting sort of arbitrage happening behind the scenes between various VC firms. One, which had a larger fund, was, started out high because they were trying to drive out another fund that wasn't going to be able to compete at those higher valuations. But in the meantime, everybody is telling me, either take the smaller amount or take the bigger amount because each one is going to be better for you. It's well, which one should I actually listen to? On a Monday, we decided to, look at term sheets. We had 6 of them. And, some really good investors. And, one came in way over the top at the end. They were, a top tier firm. It would have been great to go with them, but I really decided that I wanted to go with Martin Casado from Andreessen Horowitz, who just is a singular investor. He's just somebody who gets infrastructure. He understands the technology, but he also understands the go-to-market. He understands the company building pieces. If I get, 15 minutes a month or text messages when I need it with Martine, that's going to be worth way more than, somebody else who's going to be out there, pounding the pavement to send candidates my way or et cetera. And then I guess 6 months later, there were still a bunch of people that, VCs that, were like, hey, this is super interesting. We'd love to be part of your next round. When do you think that's going to be? We were planning on, maybe doing it early this year, but this was like in June or May of last year. And then at one point I went to a dinner a VC was hosting, and one of them, said, "Hey, can you meet for a beer, ahead of time?" And I'm like, "Sure." And so we meet up, and then he pulls out his back pocket. He pulls out a term sheet for our Series B, and I'm like, "What?" We weren't supposed to be raising now. But that sort of got me thinking, is like, hey, this is a really good valuation. If we can get the valuation that we wanted, why not do it sooner rather than later? The market that we're in, the people that we're going to be competing with have massive amounts of money, and there's just a lot of stuff to build in this very deeply technical field that we're in analytics. And so it's like, okay, this is going to let us grow. It's going to let us kind of achieve our goals faster. So we said, well, there's a couple of the people that I had promised that if I was raising, I would let them know. And so we did, reached out to a couple of those people, but I said, hey, I'm only going to talk to you for 3 days, because we were actually launching our beta at the same time. So I was like, the day that we launched, I'm also running around South Park in San Francisco doing all these, talking to all these VCs. Felicis was was a company that we had been talking to, and I just really liked their approach. They seem to be like the good guys. I know nobody is really a good guy. I mean, it's like, it's not that they're bad. It's just everybody's out for themselves, and you have to understand that. I like that they understood what we were doing, how we were doing it, why we were doing it. I liked the partner. And I think there was also like, you want to build the people that are around the table in your boardroom. Each one should be there for a reason, and not and have a different thing that they can offer. And we were kind of missing somebody who really had the sort of the marketing, gonna go to market chops. And like Viviana, the partner there, she'd been really early at Salesforce, and so like this seemed like a really good person to have at the table. The valuation was really good, and so we decided to take our Series B. Hopefully we don't have to raise for a long time. Yeah, and that's the story of our first 100 million raised.